We're live, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, then we shall make a start. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to Calderdale Council Children and Young People Scrutiny Board on Wednesday, 13th of December. A special welcome to those people viewing the meeting on YouTube. My name is Councillor Chris Prashad, and I'm a Ward Councillor for Greetland and Stayland, and I've taken over the chair of Children and Young People Scrutiny from my colleague, Councillor Amanda Parsons-Hulse, and hope to continue with the good work she has started. This evening, we have a challenging and emotive agenda, and I hope we can make some progress in the provision of services for children and young people with special educational needs. So, without further ado, we'll start with item 1. Are there any substitutes for this meeting, Diane?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Durans is substituting for Councillor Khan, and we have is from Councillor Khan, Carolyn Thirkill, who is a co-optee, and the chair of the Unique Ways Family Voice has sent apologies.
Thank you. Right. Members' interests. To remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests they might have in relation to the items included on this agenda. Item 3, admission of the public. It is not recommended that the public be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of the items of business on this agenda.
Sorry, Chair, to interrupt. Councillor Wilkinson's raised his hands under members' interest, maybe?
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if I should declare it or not, but just to be on the safe side, I am a member of Unique Ways and have fundraised for Unique Ways in the past as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Durans?
Sorry, Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. On the same side as that, I'm a member of Unique Ways. I'm also on the Family Voice group, and I'm a volunteer for Calderdale National Autistic Society, which I think will all be pulled into the discussions tonight, or the needs around those groups. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Danielle. Okay. Right, the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of November 2023. Can these be agreed as a correct record? And do I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Foster. Can we have a vote, please? All in agreement? Thank you. Right, the next item is deputations. And we actually have 2 deputations. One of which will be read out by Sarah Campbell, who is a parent carer of a child at Ravenscliffe School. And as the second deputation is very similar in content to Sarah's deputation, it is proposed not to read this out tonight. Sarah, if you want to start your deputation, please.
Hello, good evening, and thank you very much for letting me come along to Scrutiny Board this evening. Hopefully you all have received a copy of my deputation, but I will read it out for you. My name's Sarah Campbell. I'm a parent of a child at Ravenscliffe High School, and I'm representing a group of 24 parent carers of said children, both at primary and secondary special schools in Calderdale. These concerns and worries of parents and carers of children with EHCPs in specialist schools in Calderdale, they are in no way complaints or issues towards individual schools. And if any of our parents or carers I've taught to have felt anything to do with their child is for a school to address, they have taken that up directly. These are issues that are local authority responsibility and have resulted from a lack of strategic planning over at least the past 5 years. This cannot be put off until another day or wait for anyone's successor to come along or sort it out. This is a crisis and requires urgent attention and immediate action by all involved. 24 parents and carers came together in March of this year and have shared issues and worries about the huge gap in available and needed places for SEND children in Calderdale. The headlines. By September 2028, if all predicted numbers are allocated to Ravenscliffe High School, there'll need to be 12 more classrooms, including the 4 currently planned, and that's a conservative estimate. Strategic planning for special educational needs and disability and their families as Calderdale Strategy for Children and Young People was allowed to expire in 2022 with no new document yet complete. Some students in years 10 and 11 were moved to Spring Hall in September 23, with the local authority giving the explanation that the build would start straight away and be ready for Easter or summer 2024. These students are housed in porta cabins, and the planned building of 4 classrooms is not yet reached planning. There are now classes of 13 at Ravenscliffe High School. Department of Education BB 104 guidance for special schools is a maximum of 10 to 12 depending on need, with 20% less if they have a physical disability, which most of
Sarah, you're on mute. We've lost you. You're still on mute. Thank you.
Right, I'm back. I apologise. Turning my page, I switched myself off. In June 2022, a capacity report of Ravenscliffe High School found it to be under constant pressure to take additional pupils and severely overcrowded, using unsuitable spaces to provide the facilities necessary to educate and support pupils. In September of 2023, Ravenscliffe received 57 Year 7 requests, all with EHCPs. 34 students were admitted and 1 additional directive from another local authority. Students not admitted are clearly vulnerable as mainstream struggle to differentiate 3 to 5 years behind the age-related expectations, especially for those with additional needs also. Calderdale's number of SEN students in mainstream schools is not a positive
Diane,
thing or a number.
Danielle, can you turn on to mute, please? Sorry, Sarah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Calderdale's number of SEN students in mainstream schools is not a positive thing or a number to celebrate. These children are vulnerable. No plans for another specialist secondary school and local authority plans for the specialist school were turned down at the start of 2023. Where was Plan B if this application failed, and what is it? Ravenscliffe's Ofsted report of October 2022 stated that since the last inspection, the number of pupils has continued to increase. This is placing extreme pressure on what is already a crowded building. At the time, there were 243 pupils on roll. In September 23, that's increased to 254. Therapist input has not increased at the same rate as pupil numbers, and students are not getting sufficient therapy input. It is only the work of highly committed staff that is currently maintaining outcomes for pupils. This cannot be sustained without increased sufficiency of places as secondary school, special school. The expertise with the solutions to sufficiency of the right type of SEND places in Calderdale exists within the outstanding specialist schools in Calderdale. Their experts use them, support them, facilitate their needs and resource the necessary developments. A local authority that does not rest on its laurels but becomes a leader in the field has reduced out-of-authority placements, reduced exclusion rates, less demands on future resources and reduced numbers of failed placements, and keeps funding within the authority for future development. The big questions: where are these children going to go? Where are you going to put them? And what are you planning? What are you doing about planning for the increase in numbers? Issues with capacity and sufficiency of places in Calderdale. There's only one secondary school, specialist school, and no choice for parents or carers of students whose needs cannot be met at that mainstream school. Capacity needs to be planned and developed to meet the diverse needs of children coming through. One generic school in a local authority struggles to do that. When writing to Julie Jenkins in 2023, her reply, which I hope you've been supplied with, failed to address the questions of specialist secondary school choice, sufficiency of places for current and future level of demand, and places that meet the needs of each individual, requiring significantly less out of borough placements. Additional resource provisions are all good initiatives for students with more moderate needs who may be able to cope with a mainstream environment. But Julie Jenkins did not address the core issue of children with more significant and complex needs who will require specialist school education come what may. And it is this number that is still rising exponentially. 4 more classrooms were agreed to be built at Spring Hall site in 2022, but delays meant these will not be ready until September 25. When complete, they will only accommodate the current number on roll. Where will further intakes go, and what will be done by the local authority to create the sufficiency of places? To have sufficiency of places at Ravenscliffe High School, in addition to the Plan 4 class builds, this is at least how many classrooms will be needed. 2 more by September of 24, 4 more by September of 25, 5 to 6 by 26, 7 more by 2027, and 8 more by 2028. In the next 5 years, including the 4 agreed, 12 more classrooms are needed. This needs strategy and planning with immediate effect. The increased numbers we are talking about are not children that can be supported in mainstream schools. They are children that need specialist schools. Visit one and it will be very clear that these children need these very specialist schools with very high levels of supervision, small class groups, high level care, highly skilled and experienced staff, and education delivered in creative and imaginative ways. Children not offered a place at Ravenscliffe are vulnerable as mainstream are struggling to differentiate 3 to 5 years behind the related expectation. How many tribunals and out of area placements have to be made, and at what cost? What could be accommodated within the authority if there were more specialist school places? For the first time, Ravenscliffe High School in its history has classes of 13 students, and the maximum number of guidance is 10. 10 is thought to be a maximum, and now 3 students with complex needs has been added to that. It impacts teaching quality and time available for every child. It's about 30% rise, which would equate to adding 10 children to a class of 30 in a mainstream school. Am I okay to continue, Chair? I feel I may have taken minutes.
You've overgone the 5 minutes, but please continue.
Thank you. Behaviour of SEN children, wherever increasing numbers, in addition to the admissions, is ever more complex, challenging student behaviour will be affected by larger class numbers, more children moving around corridors, more in playgrounds, etc. Many children with SEN require space and often lots of it. The results of not having space, people getting too near or touching, too much noise, etc., are all elements that cause sudden and challenging behaviours. This is a health and safety risk to other students and staff. This does not just then contain itself in school, but it impacts on home and family as well. Many, probably most of the students at Ravenscliffe require some form of therapy. These vary, and some have very high levels of need and others less or at intervals. The therapies include occupational therapy, physiotherapy, orthotics, speech and language. It's apparent to parents and carers that these services are being spread thinner. Therapists are very rarely attend EHCP meetings or annual reviews. Currently, teaching assistants are shown and expected to deliver exercise programs 3 to 5 times a week, with a large proportion of children and every child on an individual program, and ever increasing pupil numbers. A significant increase in available therapists and visits is needed. The question of increase in therapy in ratio to student increases was asked in the letter to Julie Jenkins of June 23, who forwarded it to Rhonda Radley, but no reply on this issue was received. Capacity issues have knock-on effects on most of school life. Many things have to be done in shifts, such as lunch, including utilising libraries and classrooms, assemblies, shows. This causes great logistical issues and additional work for teachers and support staff. There are no full school assemblies as there's not enough room. The increase in student number causes logistical issues, arranging outside swimming, residential experiences, all of which have been dramatically reduced. Special schools have reduced opportunity to provide family, full school and social community integration due to capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions, anybody, please? No questions? Okay. All right. Thank you, Sarah. I am sure account has been taken of the points that you've raised, and our Director of Children and Young People's Service will be providing a progress report later. Sorry. Hassan, what's your question?
Just a quick question. With the class sizes being bigger, has that impacted grades at all? And is that shown? Or is that data just not come through yet because the years have just not done their GCSEs as it's high school?
Somebody like to come on that?
Shall I? I'm Chris Lingard, head teacher, Ravenscliffe. We don't do GCSEs, apart from one child who's done 2, who was autistic, who's very autistic, and that was his skill. Most of our children would do entry level, functional skills, etc. Everything's impacted. The quality of teaching's impacted, and everything is impacted. I mean, we do some accreditation, but it's much lower than that. So it's a harder question to answer than measuring just in GCSEs. But we now do more accreditation than we used to, but we could have children doing even more if we had more capacity to do so.
Thank you. Thank you. No more questions? Okay. Right. I'd like to bring in Chris Lingard now to continue with this item.
Okay. Can I share my screen, please? It says that the host has disabled me from doing it.
All right. Okay.
So if you could enable me, that would be fabulous.
Okay. Diane will sort it out now.
Sorry, I don't know if you're not the host. Is it a presentation that you've got?
Yes, I checked with Ben earlier if I could definitely share my screen. It said,
Is it the one that's been circulated to us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you can do it, that's
Special
great.
school challenges.
Yeah.
Right, I'll see if I can share that from here because I've got that.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm having problems, I'm afraid. Just hang on. Share screen. It's not giving me an option to share it with this presentation. Have you got it, Ben?
I've got my presentation. It just says I'm not permitted. It says the host is not allowed.
Yeah, I've got the presentation down if you throw me the host.
I thought you were a host, Ben. Just hang on. Basic advanced files. Can't see where it's allowing me to share screen. I've got the presentation open.
It's on the bottom bar.
Yeah. Mine's showing a green arrow and share screen.
Yeah, but that all that does, hang on, see what this does. I do apologise. Share, hang on. Oh, are we getting nearer? Do apologise. Slideshow.
Yay, fabulous.
Can everybody
Okay.
see that? It's looking very...
Well, can you click the slideshow bit?
Thought that was what I had just
Sorry.
clicked. Just hang on. Slideshow. There we go.
From the beginning. Sorry.
No, you're very...
I do it myself, but I can't.
No, you're welcome. I have done from beginning, but it's... Oh, here we go.
Ah, fabulous.
Thank you for your help.
Right, skip that slide. That's great. That's just who I am.
You just let me know when you want the next slide
Yeah,
on.
now, please.
Now.
Thank you. I'll
Thank
just keep
you.
putting my thumb up. Okay, thank you. So I'm Chris Lingard. I'm head teacher of Ravenscliffe. I've had the privilege, and it is an awesome privilege, to be the head of this school for the last 3.5 years. And it's my third headship in special needs. I have also got a background. I was principal educational psychologist in Leeds. So I've been a leader in SEN for about 20 years. I just thought it'd be helpful for you to have a quick look at number on roll. We are in absolute crisis in secondary special education in Calderdale. Sarah articulated that so well. I just thought it'd be useful for you to see in the last 10 years, from September 2014, there were 139 on roll. We're looking at maybe 270, 80 possibly in September. I was appointed 4 years ago next month, and there were 188 on roll. I say we're looking at nearly 100 more than that in September, depending on numbers. We have had 5 classrooms built since then, but the infrastructure of the school remains the same. We're on 2 sites, as you're probably aware, and we had 4 classrooms agreed at Spring Hall, 2 on numbers based on 2 years ago, and that's still got to go to planning. And I know that gets reported in every report. Ravenscliffe's getting 4 more classrooms, but actually it's not even going to be open till 2025 for us to be able to use. Our admission number is 141. So we're nearly double. And if you compare us to any other schools, say in Kirklees, that are similar size, they are around 150 or 160 admission. And we are, as you can see, way, way above that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this was a slide I presented to Julie, Jenkins-Paul, Tinsley, etc. in May, in the middle of May, with my co-chairs of governors and Councillor Wilkinson, which actually counts number of children in my in the 2 feeder primaries. And traditionally, we've taken between 16 and 20 mainstream students. This is a conservative estimate of just taking 10 mainstream students. And as you can see, if you just look at the total number on roll, sadly, since I've written this, we've only got 252 children, because one sadly died last week, not in school, but a child who was a very, very poorly young man. But if you just look at that numbers, these are actual children that are in the school plus 10 others. This is where Sarah, who's asked for me to share numbers with her, is saying we need more and more and more classrooms. Generally, you would expect to say about 10 in a classroom, and look at those numbers rising. They shoot through the roof. However, if we move to the next slide, it could be even worse than this, because as David Graham wrote in the SCAP return, I see you there, David, you may want to add to this later. David predicted we may need up to 90, 92 special school, extra special school places this year, rising in total to 110 next year. So actually the local authority is now telling us that actually it's a worse situation. The capacity is a worse situation than even I anticipated. Currently, we've got a meeting tomorrow to talk about our year 7s. We've got 57, well, actually I had another one today, so 58 requests for year 7 places. Next September, we've got around 30, 32 places. This is a very, very serious situation, and we're already way over capacity. Next slide, please. So the impact on our school, We've got bigger class sizes. Sarah mentioned this, and you asked about that, Councillor Nazir. So learning is less personalised, less effective. Our enriched curriculum, the wow factor we've got at Ravenscliffe has been reduced. We do a lot less going out, residential trips. There's significant pressures on staff. We have, I can't reinforce that enough, there's huge pressure on staff. Our dining room, corridors, storage, equipment, everything, hydro pool, everything is stretched beyond capacity. Our drains keep blocking. We need urgent improvements to our roof. Our roof will not go through another year. We counted about almost 100 leaks recently when it was absolutely pouring in. Our heating is just about ready to go, but all our specialist rooms are being converted to generic classrooms, but we haven't enough hydro pool vacancies now for all the children to swim more than, say, once a week, when they should be swimming 2 or 3 times a week. We haven't enough. The corridors are rammed with equipment. The dining room was built for 69 children. We now have at that site 150 odd using that. The noise, the overcrowding is a major issue, especially for children with physical and sensory needs. Additional to the capacity, general capacity, which is a huge issue, and I've been raising this as a major issue since week 1 of I arrived in Calderdale. There's about a dozen children who've got complex behavioural needs, generally children who are on the autistic spectrum, most non-verbal, use alternative communication, means of communication, and their behaviour is extremely challenging. They really need a separate but linked provision to the school. Some of those children's behaviour is so extreme, we've had to say we cannot no longer meet their needs. And some of those, a handful of those, are now out of education provision altogether because there is nowhere else to go. This week alone, we've had a major incident with one of those children. We've ended up with a member of staff with a broken arm, another member of staff who had quite a bad head injury and concussion. And in a separate incident with one of those children, we've had a member of staff who was a really bad neck injury. And she said to me, I had nowhere to go. If I had any space to take this child, it would not have happened. So we've got 2 big issues here going on. Thankfully, we've done an awful lot of work. We managed to retain we've developed our outstanding status. That will not be able to be remained any much longer. If we were inspected again, because we are so overcrowded, nobody can continue to develop an outstanding provision with the restrictions we've got. Next slide, please. Alongside our school, I've got increasing concerns about the unmet need in mainstream. I run a SENCO supervision group with mainstream secondary SENCOs. I'm on a WhatsApp group with them, and I can tell you the amount of anxiety and concern they have now because they're being consulted for children who are operating years below their expected level. We currently have reduced our any admission to around year 2 level because we're having to take the children with the most extreme needs. But those children that traditionally we would have taken a few years ago, that are operating at year 3 or year 4 with additional complex needs, are now in mainstream school. And this term alone, we've had to take 2 children who had mainstream placements failed. This is a really, really dire situation for those children. Generally, if you get a place with us, you get a fairly good deal. Yes, we're overcrowded and it's noisy and it's busy, but you still get a good deal. If you're in a mainstream school and you miss out on a placement, which 25 children will do when we start placing them, they've got a major issue. So have their families, which is extremely stressful for those families. I just also pointed out here about the 34% of Calderdale exclusions, which are very, very high, higher than the national average, were identified as having SEND, and 9.1% have an educational healthcare plan. So we're talking here, a high percentage of children who are being excluded have got unmet SEN needs. They're then being excluded and costing a lot with the high needs block. Next slide, please. last slide, you'd be pleased to know. It's essential. It's interesting, Sarah, how Sarah spoke, and I know I've spoken to parents a lot about this, especially when we were looking at potential of a third site last year. And I know I've raised some of the issues, but we need a long-term strategy. We are beyond an extra porta cabin. We have 2 porta cabins now. I'm grateful we've got those because we have somewhere to put children, but we can't keep just adding bits and pieces on. The 4 classrooms we've got were just classrooms. We need dining space, hall space, outside space. We need proper facilities. These are our most vulnerable children in Calderdale. These are our suggestions, but I know the SEN team are working at an options appraisal. So my number 1 is please, please, please consider further developing Spring Hall. We're already on 2 sites. This is the most cost-effective solution. We could develop that and still maintain the running track and everything else. We can have a symbiotic relationship there. It would be absolutely make sense to do that. We can look at a different school, but we know we've offered up the Circuit Green site, but we're told that it would cost as much to build a school somewhere else as they would of the similar size, at least the roof won't leak and the boilers will work. We could look at planning a third site for Ravenscliffe for a specific student group. For example, those children who are on the autistic spectrum, anxious, school refusers, etc. But governors are very clear it needs to be properly planned, resourced and designated. It does not want to be spare classrooms in a space in an undersubscribed school, which was a suggestion. Or we're happy to be as we are and go and build and develop and do something somewhere else. We're not precious. We're not trying to be empire building, but you need to do something and you need to do it. Well, we should have done it before, but we need to do something as a matter of absolute urgency. So we've been in crisis mode for a while. Next September, I don't know how we are going to actually resolve this situation. I can't stress how urgent this is, and additional provision needs to be found. If there is a long-term plan that is 3, 4, 5 years, we know it takes that long to build or to develop, fine, we can work backwards from that. But we need to develop strategy down, Calderdale special school strategy down, not just Ravenscliffe. It's very acute in the secondary sector, the primary less so. But a whole Calderdale strategy for provision needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris, for the very impassioned presentation. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions.
You can stop sharing now.
Sorry, Chair, is it okay if I stop sharing the screen?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Tremaine.
Thank you very much for that, and for Sarah's previous comment as well. It's really important to get that perspective from from parents, carers, and from you as the head, Chris, as well. This might be a question that's actually more for Julie to come in on, but I guess I was sort of just thinking, obviously, as you say, Chris, Ravenscliffe is oversubscribed, lots of issues there. Julie might be the best person to come in on kind of where do the children within Calderdale who can't get into Ravenscliffe, what sort of provision are they attending currently?
Do have a full report, as you know, it's going to cover a lot of the detail. Do we want to move on to that now and then take questions on all of the issues, or otherwise we'll be taking bits and pieces, I think, from the further report? But I don't know if there are any particular questions for Chris at this stage as the head of Ravenscliffe, particularly about the school and the school delivery for our children, and then suggest that we come on to the full SEND report from Paul and his team, and then we can get into a wider question and debate. But I would suggest we stick with questions for Chris at this moment, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Any further questions for Chris? No? Okay, well, we'll move on to the update and progress reports of provision of services for SEND.
Thank you. Paul and his team are going to lead you through this. I'm going to hand over to him.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to introduce Victoria Coyle. Victoria has presented the report, which hopefully that you have all had access to. We will obviously address the concerns that Chris has raised. And just to say that we have very recently, as Chris mentioned, met with Chris and again talked about the pressures that she's raised with us, and there will be an options report coming to members early in the new year, we hope. As we were asked obviously to present a general report on SEN, there are other areas of pressures as well. So we will cover the pressures that Chris has raised, but I think it would be good for you to hear about what's happening in the general system in terms of SEN. Just to say that the pressures also, whilst this doesn't undermine anything that Chris has said, we are dealing with a national crisis here. You will have been well aware of parents and carers demonstrating outside of county halls across the country. So this is a major pressure on many local authorities. But I think it would be good if Victoria just give you some highlights from the report that she's put together. So I'll just ask Victoria just to go through a few key points, and then obviously myself and Victoria and David will be happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As Paul said, everyone will have had a copy of this report, and it takes us across quite the broad area of the 0 to 25 SEND area. And I think it's important if we do just step back and go through those things in a way to then address the crisis and the urgency that's been described so far. Because as leaders in this area, we have to think of the whole system, and that's important because it has knock-on effect as we're trying to think about how to create the sort of sustainable financial viability in anything. So I won't take too long though. I'll give you the areas of things that we consider to be strengths, and also then the areas we feel are things we have still much to do on. I think what's important is to say that in Calderdale, and I've only been here for a few months, it has lots of positive things to be able to report. And actually, we know ourselves really well. We've had a number of checkpoints recently, including our annual Ofsted conversation, which was able to focus those thoughts further. Now, you will see in the report that we are positive about some key headline areas in terms of our co-production and partnership. We have good strategic lead around our SEND Partnership Board, and our Family Voice Calderdale are included in really important strategic areas. We know that Sarah rightly pointed out in her deputisation about mainstream school, but maybe not to be seen as a positive. In Calderdale, we do see that as a positive in terms of having higher number of children being able to be there. This is important because it's our children's right in law to have that enshrined as the starting point. And actually, in terms of the government's direction, it's things around that we want to be able to support as well. However, we'll come on to recognising all the things that you've raised as well. We have to think that when children leave special school, they have to come back into the community, and we want them where possible to be local to that. We've got some good data. We've got some good attainment data for our children and young people with SEND. There's still lots to do, but there's some really good pockets of that, which the report outlines, and lots of really good things going on in early years in terms of some creative practice around the Dingley's Promise, enabling and empowering settings to be more responsive to need, I suppose recognising kind of identification of need and coming out of COVID, the kind of impact on that cohort. Our attendance figures, are positive as well in terms of national averages. And actually, we have fewer young people who are NEET, in other words, not in education, employment or training, and also those that we don't know about. So that's positive. We have great schools. We have good and outstanding mainstream and special schools, and that continues to have positive impact on our children and young people. We have also another really big area for us in SEND is the EHC process. That remains a really positive area in terms of timeliness, and that's important for us to think about how we maintain that. I suppose we can say also that we've developed a lot of work around the local offer. It's in development stage, but it's coming together really well. At the moment, there's still lots of inaccuracies, but we're positive we've really done that well with parents, and we'll be able to create something for families and professionals to be able to navigate in a much better way. And we're pleased to be part of the Change programme, which is the DFE, the Department for Education's SEND and Alternative Provision Plan that was issued in March. And it's a series of themed tests across the SEND area that will allow us in Calderdale to develop the areas we want to, using a lot of information and advice as well as some funding. So Calderdale is a key part of that in the Yorkshire and Humber. So those are some key things. Now, equally, I think we recognise there is much to do. We have too many exclusions in Calderdale. That is potentially something that's coming out of the pressures around mainstream and the lack of provision so far. We know that our quality of our EHD plans needs to improve. We know that the post-16 area, we've got lots to do still in terms of developing more pathways and creating more opportunities around work, completing and putting in place SEND employment forums. And although we've done quite a bit of extra building and making new provisions, it probably feels very reactive. And that's something which you're raising today. And I feel the frustration, and thank you for the deputisation at the beginning. So there have been a number of different expansions, including our primary special secondary special schools. And obviously, as Chris has set out, the expansion within Ravenscliffe, but there's still much for us to do in terms of the demand. So the demand for special school places means that we do have families that are waiting too long to find an appropriate provision. And I think Sarah probably set that out well. But we have to recognise that GLD, in terms of general learning delay, is one type of need we have demand for, which we do, and we would recognise we do. But equally, we have a gap around need for pupils with social, emotional and mental health needs, and also for autism as well within that. And there is a need for us to think about what we're going to do around provision for that. We want to make sure, therefore, that we are planning collectively across the borough for this. What it's meant is that in Calderdale, we use independent schools quite with an increased amount, and that puts a lot of pressure on our high needs block. So the pressures are now leading to a significant overspend, which we have to address. And then we have to think about that collectively across the whole area. And that affects what happens in mainstream school. Now, we have got a SEND strategy that needs a refresh, a rewrite, a co-produce, and we need to have that SEND sufficiency plan included in that. So we understand and know these things. What's positive then in terms of the actions is that much is happening around that already. So the Change programme has allowed us to pull together our local area inclusion plan, which allows us to set this all out in one place and come together collectively to decide how we're going to make the difference. And those areas are going to very much focus on what's happening in mainstream schools, keeping and supporting children, increasing parental confidence, trying to reduce the need for schools to permanently exclude, right through to developing more up in post-16 and more employment, and thinking about the sufficiency within that. All of this needs to be underpinned by a plan to deliver within our budget envelope. So the SEND strategy is currently in progress. We'll have a lot of activity come the new term around stakeholder engagement, and we will produce a SEND AP strategy for the summer term. We're hopeful to get it done well. It needs to be done really well in collaboration with our partners. And in terms then of the specific issue around special school places, we are providing an options paper in the next couple of weeks to set out Ravenscliffe options alongside other suggestions about developing new provision. This will include developing the strategy around support within mainstream, making sure that we develop ARPs, we call them, autism resource provisions, so enhanced provisions within our mainstream schools across the area. Developing additional specialist places, if that's what is indeed agreed, and consideration of potentially another special school for an area, potentially for SEMH. So we're trying to pull all of those things together. In terms of timing, some of these things happen more quickly than others. And as Chris has already pointed out, that it takes time to build new schools. But it's going, there's a lot of momentum in where we're pulling this together. And I hope that gives you a flavour of where we are with things, and perhaps it's helpful to open that up to everyone to go into more detail.
Thank you, Victoria. With regard to timing, have you any time frames at all?
Well, the timing on agreeing new special schools will have to be agreed through an options paper through our lead member and through that process, because that requires quite a significant capital spend. And that will impact then, I guess, on the other plans around developing further provision within mainstream schools. We have a number of plans underway around that. There's already expansion consideration within the primaries, Highbury and Woodbank.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Atkinson, please.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of points, which I think one maybe for Chris and one maybe for Julie and the team. The first one's to Chris around when did she or her predecessors alert the council, and what point was that over the problems that you've just mentioned, which obviously should concern everyone? The second point is around the option paper. When we like to see that? Is that going to be just after Christmas or for the next year? And also, the Department for Education, is there anything they can do to support in this area?
Should I go first? The first bit? Okay. Well, you see from my first slide, that's why I gave you my first slide, Councillor Atkinson, so that you could see the increase in general numbers. And as I said at the beginning, when I was appointed 4 years ago, there was 188, and we'd be nearly at, we're probably about 90 more than that. So increasing capacity has been an issue for years and years. I found a presentation that Martin, my Mormon, who's the head prior to me, had brought 12 years ago, highlighting issues about capacity prior to the Spring Hall being built. And as those of you who were around that length of time ago would remember, that was going to be built for 6 classrooms, and it got reduced to 4 at the last when it was agreed to go, so that it could get on with it. But he was raising issues then. I remember when I came to interview for the post, that was the big issue they were talking to me about. But it has grown exponentially since, and I'm sure Victoria would say the requests of educational healthcare plans, etc., has shot through the roof as well. But demand, I think, as mainstream the pressure on mainstream is so great that the demand of there is more fallout from that. So there is just every year. I mean, I was counting. I have a request out of authority request, an average of 1 a week. So we have the Calderdale demand, and we have everybody else trying to get in as well. We've become a little bit of a victim of our own success with that. I almost wonder if we hadn't maintained the outstanding. I know that's a really bizarre way of looking at it, but I know because we have a lot of parents who choose to come to our school. In terms of complex needs, I don't know if that's what you were referring to. That has similarly grown and grown and grown. But the issue is, since I've been there, we've converted classroom after classroom. We've converted the staff room into a classroom. Every specialist, cookery room, science, whatever it is no longer specialist. It's generic. But the problem is we now have no breakout spaces. We have no room to go. If we need to take the rest of the class out and leave a child in who's dysregulating, we only have outside. So both have a knock-on effect on each other. I don't know if that answers your question fully enough, but
thank you.
Okay.
And the second part?
The options paper, we're briefing Councillor Wilkinson on Friday, and with the view to have that ready now. We've written it, so in terms of the draft and that, so I'm positive that's imminent and ready to go.
Thanks, Victoria. Councillor Durrance.
Thank you, Chair. I probably should say that there's a slight other declaration of interest. I have 2 children that are both disabled, who both have an EHCP and have accessed provision that we're talking about tonight. And I've also been taking part in the local offer parents discussions. I do have quite a lot of points that I want to address. I think it's challenging because it feels a wide conversation that would have potentially been better broken down in a sense. It feels a lot about capacity and appropriate provision, and whether we can, or we have time to look at why we've got to that point, which I think Chris addressed briefly. So I think some of Sarah's points with the deputation was also relatively felt within parents who have high needs children within mainstream settings, that inability to provide an adapted provision if therapies are needed. I've had parents come along to me and have very similar frustrations, and along with choice. Often parents whose children don't meet the threshold for a high needs resource provision, that have children who have different challenges, are specifically being pushed towards schools that we know can meet those better. And some schools are not always as good or receptive at doing that, which I think removes choice in the same way that it does with only having one provision itself. I think another point that we need to make, as well as Victoria's, in regards to the cost of meeting needs out of area, is how isolating that is for our young people. My daughter had to travel over an hour to school, and that was really difficult because she didn't have any friends. She still didn't have any friends locally. So the knock-on effect for the other services is great, because of course then it's about putting through for a social care assessment in order that she can go out and socialise and meet other children and friends. So I understand the challenges from both sides. I also wanted to share that in my time within Family Voice, I have only got positive things to say in regards to the people and the services from Calderdale who have been receptive to open conversations, honest conversations. I think that has helped hugely with parents understanding the challenges and the council understanding from a personal perspective why we get to that point. There's been some fantastic work that has been not led just from Family Voice, but has just been as receptive from Calderdale's officers and team in being open, honest, and understanding around both sides. And I think within the transport meeting, there's been, well, there is a lot of challenges within transport. The transport team came, they visited, they listened, which was fantastic. And they even made some changes to their policies in response to some parents' concerns that they were raised. Those conversations are key, really, for us both to understand each other's frustrations and why we're at the situation that we're at. But I do have a couple of questions, so I hope that's okay, particularly around exclusions, because I'm working on the moment at looking at that, because as we know, they've increased. We keep talking about the increase in capacity and need, and I think without looking at why we've got this increase in exclusions, we'd be missing a trick. It says 34% of exclusions have SEND. I wanted to ask, is that specific, registered on the SEND register or not? Because I think it would be more. Secondly, 9.1% have an EHCP. I want to ask how many of those exclusions triggered an interim review, because that would highlight to me that needs were not appropriately being met. I wanted to ask Chris how many of her children are excluded within Ravenscliffe, because it seems like she's dealing with some high and complex needs. And in response to that, how are we ensuring that our schools are more aware? Is there any expectation that all staff members are trauma informed, responsive to that need? Because I know Highbury have done some fantastic work in understanding the impact of sensory needs to SENCOs, but I don't believe it's compulsory. So I just wondered if there was any work in order to ensure that that is delivered within all schools, like the Diglis Promise, where they get a bit of an award for it. Is that okay, Chair?
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Does Paul want to take up the exclusions question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm happy to do that. Exclusions is a very challenging area for us, and it is something that we are talking to both our secondary heads and primary heads very regularly about. In fact, the last secondary heads conference we had just recently in Leeds, we had a whole session where we were particularly looking at the issue around exclusions. Absolutely, we want our schools to engage with trauma-informed practice. We also will challenge, well, I'll correct that, we have no legal authority to challenge any permanent exclusion in any school. What we can do is support parents where we believe that perhaps the exclusion has been disproportionate or inappropriate or illegal on discrimination grounds. It is still obviously illegal to exclude a pupil on the grounds of a disability. But ultimately, that is a challenge for parents to bring. And via our exclusions officer, we do work with parents. And I have made it clear to our exclusions officer, I really want to push that with parents to make sure they are aware of that right to challenge. Ultimately, however, exclusion remains the discretion of the head teacher. And we regularly meet with Ofsted, and every time that, and Julie will back me up on this, every time we meet with Ofsted, I challenge them about how they are holding schools accountable during inspections for inclusivity. So it is an ongoing issue, but at least our schools are talking to us about it.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And I know that exclusions are on the agenda for the next meeting on the 24th of January. So the second part of the question, I think it was for Chris.
Okay, so suspensions I would use if there is it's conduct behaviour. If a child has, I'm unable, they've hurt another child intentionally, or a member of staff. So, for example, historically, a child who broke a member of staff's nose, that kind of thing. A young person who purposefully went and has assaulted a number of people. We very rarely do children hurt other children, because there's a lot of staff that would stop that. I have managed to avert exclusion so far. I have suspended a young man this week who, as I explained before, has caused a lot of serious harm. We had Martin Allingman this morning telling me I should have permanently excluded him. Depending on it, there's a big multi-agency meeting next week. He can't come back my moral, ethical, psychological core says exclusions are bad, don't do it, do anything you can. The problem we have is where there is no other provision to put a child. And I had, prior to Victoria, when Alex was here, I had a situation where we had a daily threat to other children and staff. And I had to say to Alex, I'm sorry, but unless other provision is found, I will exclude this child by this date. And I would. And again, it would have broken my heart to do so because these children have got a disability. But I also have parents like Sarah and other parents with children that we have to have in a safe environment. And it's where it becomes a predictable risk and you know it's a risk, but this is another issue for me. So again, that cohort of children that we call them emergent learners that are kind of preschool level, non-verbal, that we are really struggling with this cohort at the moment. And I do use suspensions just to give a break, but I say so far I've avoided exclusion. So far, this time next week, it might be a different story if we don't have another provision for this child, but I feel that my hands are tied here.
Okay, thank
Chair,
you.
Could I just quickly ask Christine while she's there?
Well, please call me Chris.
Chris.
Only my grandma called me Christine.
Sorry.
All right.
do you think the suspension or the risk of exclusion has increased because you don't have the space
Absolutely.
in order to appropriately manage?
Absolutely, 1,000,000%.
Right.
We have nowhere to go with these children. We have no breakout spaces. We've done everything we can to do. We've got one tiny little cupboard of a room that we have as a retreat that you can, with bean bags, and you can have soft. The other day there was, lighting, and it's not a seclusion room. It's just a calm down room. You get children sensory room, yeah, but not a sensory room as in lots of stimulation. The opposite of that.
Yeah.
We have sensory rooms too, but that was full the other day, and we have some blue benches down the main corridor, and there was about 5 children who were dysregulating, and there was nowhere to take them. So absolutely, it's impacting on everything. At lunch times, we have major issues. I know a few of you have been in at lunch times, because the dining room's in the middle of the open plan area in the middle of the school, and it's too loud. We constantly have our children crying. Or today we had somebody who just pushed somebody over. They were just beside themselves. It was too loud, too noisy, too unsafe.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Foster.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions, really. Which would make more sense, looking at the capacity issues? Would it make more sense to increase capacity at Ravenscliffe or build a new school? And I'm conscious that we applied to build a new school, a free school, but we were turned down. And that's part of the issue, isn't it? That we haven't had that agreement to be able to build that new school, and therefore, all the pressure is on Ravenscliffe and the couple of other small provisions that are local. But what options are available, and can we apply again to build a new, for funding to build a brand new school? Would that be the better option rather than just increasing Ravenscliffe exponentially? I'm interested to learn. I'm interested to learn what your feelings are, Chris, on which would be the better option for you. And also, are other authorities seeing a similar increase in numbers and huge pressure on capacity? Because I can't imagine it's just us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want me to answer that from my perspective? I know the SN team will need to from theirs. I genuinely don't mind which way we go. We are an outstanding school. We have the skills. We have the ability to be able to develop provision. This is my 3rd headship of an SEM. I've done 2 generic learning difficulties in SEMH autism school. We've got the skills. We've got a tremendous staff team. We can develop what you like. But if the preference is for another school, We're not precious about that. We just need some provision, and we know how to do that. If you want to use those skills, great, we can do that. But there's going to have to be something that is developed. I've forgotten the second part of your question that was related to me. I'm so sorry.
Is it just Calderdale or is it everywhere?
Right. Well, there is a national problem, but it's particularly acute in Calderdale. So I was talking to two, my colleague who's here was talking to someone in a third school in Perclese, for example, our nearest neighbours, and they're complaining that they are full and they're about half our capacity. So yes, it's a national. Bradford particularly, we're getting a lot of requests from Bradford because of the as well. I reject them all, you'll be pleased to know. But there is a national problem, but we were already, it's like when you're almost full and you're pouring more and more in, we're already overflowing, and so we can't take that extra pressure as well as some schools can.
Thank you. Hassan, please.
I just had a couple of questions. I think I'll just start with, how many special education needs children do we have with complex needs in Calderdale?
Who would like to take that?
And
sorry, shall I take that one first? And
yeah.
That's a great question. Thank you. Well, I mean, I suppose we've got about, when you think about complex needs, you think about those pupils with EHC plans. So we have approximately 2,100 growing by the day EHC plans. And obviously of those, we will see a number with autism and, you know, quite complex learning within that, and also quite high levels of numbers of pupils with social, emotional and mental health needs. There are also children what we call on SEND support, and there are about 12% of those children are in our mainstream school across all different types of need. But when you think about EHC plans collectively and nationally, it's only about 3 to 4% of the population of children and young people in schools and settings. So it's important to see it like that as well. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Did you have another?
And then the other question was, like, where do we kind of stand within, like, what can we do other than expanding rooms and the capacity?
Anybody wants to take that one?
Well, again, I suppose our SEND sufficiency is important to consider mainstream and what is important within that. We talked about the ARPs, the additional resource provisions. I think the pressures are largely looking at some, special schools as a school as such in terms of new provision. But also what's important, and we talked about it before, was really like what else, and everyone's raised it in different ways. Sarah's work did as well. What's happening in mainstream around families' experience about teaching and learning, about the curriculum, about the support. And those things are incredibly important. So we ensure that we do really upskill the mainstream area and continue to support the good work where they're doing it. So I think it's important to see it as a range of solutions, really.
Thank you.
Could I just add, Chair, that I wouldn't want it to come across as though we haven't been adding capacity. We have added, just looking at the numbers, we've added 120 places to Ravenscliffe over the past few years, and we've got 40 more coming on stream. That's what I've been told, Chris, in terms of...
I don't understand that. 120 places in how long?
So we've got...
You're counting the sixth form?
So we've got 70 places at Spring Hall, 50 at Scarecoat, and 40 places coming on stream. Yeah. So, I just want to make the point. I'm not saying it's, I'm not arguing it's sufficient, Chris. I'm just saying it's not that we've been sat on our hands doing nothing. We have built additional SEN hubs. We've talked to Chris and other mainstream schools as well about adding capacity within mainstream schools, SEN hubs built onto mainstream schools. So we have been consistently looking for additional capacity, and we are obviously keeping members informed about the pressures. And ultimately, to come back to Councillor Foster's question about what would be the best option in terms of the four options that Chris quite rightly put forward. those are options that will be put to Cabinet. So ultimately, it is for Cabinet to decide how they feel it's best to meet the capacity. It's obviously for officers to point out the pressures, but Cabinet ultimately will decide on what the best option and way forward is. As I say, I just wanted to make the point that we have been adding to capacity, but I absolutely take the point that we want local places for local children. I totally agree with what Sarah said in that regard as well.
Thank you, Paul. Sarah.
Thank you. One question at the end, and I just wanted to say that Calderdale has got jewels in the crown, and I am not unappreciative of the work that has been done. As somebody who looks after a child with complex disabilities, I make a lot of demands on it, if you like, and many of them are met. My key issue, as I said in my deputation, is capacity, and I'm hearing a lot about development of other skills and places for SEND children in secondary mainstream, and I'm not saying that's not important and doesn't need to happen, but there is nowhere to put children. September of next year, less than a year away. How is that strategic planning by the local authority? There is nowhere to put those children. The places that have been developed, and there has been capacity, because there had to be. Ravenscliffe was only built for 69 students originally. There has been additional places added, but even when you've finished the 4 classrooms that haven't even reached planning yet, it only covered the number of students on roll last September. So there has been no forward planning. Not forward, it's been sticking plasters, and they needed to be done, but we are nowhere near reaching capacity in special schools that is necessary. And I need to know, and I'd like to know today, where those children in September 2024 are going to go. I don't mind if they don't go to Ravenscliffe. I don't mind where they go, as long as the settings meets their needs. And at this moment in time, there is nowhere for those children to go. Ravenscliffe cannot squeeze any more children in that building and cannot spread its resources any further.
Thank you, Sarah. Anybody want to come back on that, please?
Well, that process obviously is largely talking about the children moving through their phase transfer, where we've got to make those decisions by February the 15th, 2024. So on an individual basis, those will be considered. And as Chris mentioned, there are a number of meetings going on over these weeks to look at the first request for Ravenscliffe, and then to plan where there's a gap in terms of being able for Ravenscliffe children to be able to have a place. And the Children and Families Act always has the legislation around that. So Ravenscliffe will come back and say whether or not they can meet need. And it's for us then to come up with a plan that's suitable and appropriate for each of those individual children, which is what we will be doing and what we are doing now. In terms of whether they then need, and some of it, and it's not just obviously for GLD, we're talking about pupils across the range of need in terms of SEMH, also, so we have to consider all of those things, and that's what we're doing on an individual basis. And we have a statutory duty around that, and we place a lot of emphasis on it. And that's something which is one of the key jobs right now for the SEND team, who regularly update me with what's happening around that. In terms of where there will be a gap, we will, to a certain extent, the options paper is going to be looking at what the interim could be as well. It'll be looking again at solutions within schools where they've come forward around space. For some children, it will be the option of going into a resource provision. For some children, it will be mainstream where that's suitable, we have to look at it individually as well. It's a recognised. There's a pressure, so I don't deny that. You know, and obviously we work very focused around this time to try and make that outcome suitable for each and every one of our children who are facing this at this time.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. Sheila.
Hi, thank you. I just, listening to this, you know, we can understand and appreciate the competing pressures on SEND provision across mainstream and specialist schools. And to me, it feels a bit like some of the things in the report, and I'm speaking to report 6, I feel it's a bit like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And, you know, there's just not enough money and there's not enough things happening. But I want to ask a question specifically, if I can bring up the right piece of paper on my computer, about the point 133 and to 137, is it, or 9, where it's talking about, you know, obviously the local authority has limited funds. And in this, they're talking about the local authorities being able to transfer 0.5% of schools block to high needs following the approval of Schools Forum. Well, I went onto the School Forum's minutes to find out that they obviously didn't approve that. And so that, you know, it says in the report that approval can be sought from the Secretary of State. And they can actually ask for a transfer of greater than 0.5% of the school blocks to the high need block. And it just says Calderdale is in the process of applying for this approval. And I'm just a little bit concerned, well, I'm more than a little bit concerned about, you know, the relationships between the local authority and schools and the, you know, the local authority and heads. And the Schools Forum is made up of heads, governors from across the borough, from all sections of education. And they haven't approved that. And you know, from what little I've managed to read today about it, their main concern is about taking away from mainstream schools to pay for the high need schools when mainstream schools are struggling as well. And I should declare here, I'm a school governor and I'm a retired teacher that still maintains contact and interest on what's happening in education and, you know, in various bodies and forms. And it just seems to me that, you know, the head teachers I know have been saying for a long time that they haven't, you know, mainstream schools, that they haven't got the money to provide for the children that they're supposed to look after on the special needs spectrum. And the authorities are saying they don't have the money to look after those on the educational plans. And it seems as if the authorities want to take from one hand to put it in the other hand, but the children are still going to suffer through that. And I just wondered, you know, why is the authority going to go and take this to the Secretary of State when it could jeopardize so many relationships and, you know, and children, like everybody else has been saying? Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila.
Shall I come in there, Chair?
Yes, you can do. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Yeah, just to explain to the Children's Scrutiny members, we're talking about, really, it's the same pot of funding that we get from the government for our children's education in Calderdale. It has a ring fence around it for different needs. And what we're talking about is moving it from the mainstream funding into the high needs block. All schools get the mainstream funding and all schools get the support from the high needs block. So we're not talking about taking off from one pot to give to another. We're talking about making sure that we can support our children. The high needs block pays for a lot of things. It pays for our special schools. And I think Chris would say, and the other head teachers of our special schools in Calderdale would say, compared to many local authorities, they are very well funded with what we give them to do the job they need to do. So that's one thing we pay for at the high needs block. We pay top-ups to schools for education, health and care plans from the high needs block. So every child with an EHCP, schools get a top-up allowance from ourselves. We pay that at a 12% rate compared to many other councils that pay at 10% rate. So schools get, and this is mainstream schools as well, that get extra funding for children with EHCP plans. What's happened is, particularly since COVID and the rise in special needs, the request for EHCP plans, and then what we've been talking about tonight is the need for specialist provision, is that when we don't have it in the borough, because we're clear, Chris cannot meet all that need, and Chris is around a certain cohort of children. So when we have children with different additional complex needs, we will look sometimes to schools within the private sector, within Calderdale. William Henry Smith is an example of one of our local schools that are in the borough, but we pay for places there, and we also buy in places outside Calderdale too. Now that is costing us on the high needs block £3 million per year. So we do have an overspending situation. We're not dissimilar in this overspending situation to many other councils. So last year, the high needs block was overspent by nearly £1 million. And this year we are projecting a nearly £5 million overspending position. So what the Department for Education have said is that is sitting there. It's not on the council's budget. It's just sitting there at the moment as an overspend. They are lending us the money, the £1 million from last year, nearly £1 million, and the £5 million that we may spend this year, on the understanding that we write a recovery plan and we pay every penny back. So this is, if you like, a loan from the DFE. We cannot afford, obviously, to find 6 million on top of everything else we're spending. So it is something that we need to address in terms of how we're going to more efficiently meet the needs of our children with complex needs in the borough, all the things we've been talking about tonight. One of the options that we do have is to ask for a transfer from the mainstream budget to the high needs budget. Many of the councils have done this. We haven't done it before, but we have been to Schools Forum and we've put the case forward about why we want to transfer some of the mainstream funding to the high needs block. The high needs block also supports children who are being excluded from school. And as you've heard this evening, there are higher numbers in Calderdale than you would see probably in the average local authority area. So this is another area of spending for us where, as the schools are excluding from mainstream, as you've heard, Chris is not excluding. She's doing everything she can to support children in the special schools. Mainstream schools are excluding. We're funding that out of the high needs block. So we do feel it's fair to ask for the transfer of funds from mainstream to high needs. It is a small percentage. It's 0.5% of the mainstream funding. It equates to about £1 million. So looking at the overall £6 million pressure, it will help alleviate us $1 million of that, but not the full amount. So we need to make other changes too. Victoria's touched on the DFE change programme this evening, and it'll be, I think it'd be helpful for members to hear more about that as that develops, because what that is doing, the DFE are saying, let's have a look at the whole of the SEND system in 4 councils in West Yorkshire. So there's ourselves and Wakefield and Leeds and Bradford all working together to have a look at the overspending situation that everybody is in and see if there are different ways of working and things that we can do to transform services and meet need better. So that's the position of why we've, why we're asking for the transfer. I have written to every head teacher and every governor, each chair of governors in the schools, to explain why we have taken the decision to do this, to go to the Secretary of State and ask for the transfer. If we weren't in the position that we were financially, we wouldn't have to, but like most councils, we are under significant pressure on all budgets, as schools are as well. And it's something that we do want to work on together. It isn't an us and them, as Chris knows. The SEND Strategic Group, we very much want to work in partnership with everybody to address this and be very open about what the plans are. And that was an agenda item, wasn't it, Chris, at the meeting that we had last week, where we shared with the whole partnership where we're up to financially and what we're trying to do and the plans we're putting in place. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just ask, sorry about the bell, it's my next meeting, people arriving. If I could just sort of follow up, I know there was concern about the CFA sort of regulation 42 and there's sort of a bit of a conflict as whether that the transfer of funds from, if you like, the school block to the high needs block, whether that could be challenged. And I just want to ensure that what we're doing is legal, really. And I think other people are of the same mind. So I don't know if anybody can respond on that at all.
Sheila, as far as I... No,
sorry, Julie. Can we just make sure it's a fairly quick answer? We've got 2 further questions and we really do need to move on. Thank you.
Sheila, as far as I know, it is legal. Many councils have done it. It's a decision for the Secretary of State. I think that's pretty clear. It's their decision to make, and we're waiting. We've made the request and we're waiting for a response.
Thank you. Councillor
Issett. And apologies, I'll have to leave the meeting short.
Thank you.
I'll make it quick because obviously a lot of what's already been said, and I should probably declare that I'm currently a secondary school teacher, so have an interest. I just think it's really important to state that from an exclusions perspective and a mainstream, it's not just the chatter earlier was a bit like, oh, well, it felt a bit like, oh, well, they exclude. Nobody at a secondary school wants to exclude a child at all or ever. And I just think in the same way that Chris was discussing earlier about their capacity in her educational setting, secondary mainstream schools, in the most part, don't have the sensory, the de-escalation rooms, the facilities to meet need. So, and my concern is that if you look at the number of SEN, look at the number of EHCPs, in 2029, we're predicting there to be 6,333. That's 4,000 more places. And Chris is talking about 12 years ago, we were saying that capacity was an issue and we haven't moved on. Well, in 5 years' time, we're going to have 4,000 more EHCPs. And a lot of the conversation that we're having today from Victoria were about mainstream settings and, okay, there's this options paper coming out, but what can we do really to increase the rate at which change is happening? Because I'm concerned that it's really, 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 really slow. Also, what options are we providing our mainstream settings when they know they have a child and they're struggling to meet need? Are we as a council providing something, an extra support for them so that they don't get to the point where an exclusion is the only option? And then the third question would be around how many parents are choosing to electively home educate their child because they're not getting in a place in a school that they think is right? And what are we doing as a council to support the parents to meet the needs at home from elective home education perspective? And thank you to everybody for coming and presenting tonight, even though it's quite stark. What has been presented and the situation seems quite dire.
Thank you, Felicity. Who would like to come back on that one, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on some of that. Yeah, thanks, Councillor Issett. And if I came across as in any way accusatory of schools, apologies. It wasn't meant to come across that way. And I made it quite clear to both secondary heads and primary heads that when I present data on exclusion, this is not judgmental in any way. It's just data. And my question is why we're seeing exclusions increase. A part of the challenge for us as a local authority, it comes back to Julie's point about the high needs block. Our only statutory responsibility around exclusion is to provide alternative education where pupils are permanently excluded. I wasn't here at the time, but I understand that a number of years ago, School Forum voted to remove the funding for the behaviour support service. So I think it's important to note that that children are excluded not just because they have a special educational need or an undiagnosed need. Children are permanently excluded for behaviour disciplinary reasons, where there are not necessarily any special needs. So part of this is about funding, and the conversations that we're really having with schools is about how can we work together as one education community without any judgment to support schools. And one of the ways to do that is, for example, to increase the opportunity to provide alternative settings for children at risk of exclusion. So I can assure you that we're having those conversations, but it is a systemic issue, and schools, have to work with us. And I think we need to be on the same page. There are whether we like it or not, there are some schools that are excluding more pupils than others.
Thank you.
And the coach began to the bank, the bank.
Mandy, thank you. Has that answered your question, Councillor Issett?
I was just wondering as well, what about the electively home educated students? And I appreciate that the and I wasn't meaning you were accused. I just think that sometimes it comes to
Sure.
when it talks about secondary and exclusions, it sometimes can err on the side of, oh, well, they just exclude. And I can assure you that secondary schools absolutely do not just exclude. It is an absolute last ditch situation, as Chris said in her case. And I have raised some questions around exclusions already, sort of in the background of the CYP and schools that are doing it and whatnot as well. So, but thank you for that. Yeah, I just wondered what are we doing about, because I would imagine there are parents that don't get offered a place at a school that they think can meet their child's needs, so electively home educate. Are we gathering data on that? What are we doing to support those parents?
Yeah. So very quickly, yes, we are. We've seen, you're right, we've seen a significant increase in electively home educated. I think it's important to make the point that electively home educated is elective, so it is a choice. Nonetheless, we are seeing parents electing to home educate, and we do suspect that some of that is behind needs not being met in school. So again, it's a funding issue because we do not get sufficient funding. We are by law required to visit those children once a year, and that's the funding we get. We have increased with our education welfare service. We've appointed an additional officer to work with those children, but the money that we get is it's just not enough to address the need. But it is again something that's being talked about at a national level, and it's something that there is a real risk around elective home education, and I totally agree it is getting out of hand.
I think as well, it probably for some parents they won't feel like they have a choice in that, will they? Because they're in a situation where they know their child needs to be in a special school setting. There is no space for their child in a special school setting. So they're forced down the path of sending their child to mainstream. The child is not coping at mainstream. So the child is heading for permanent exclusion. So their only really option is to electively home educate before their child gets a permanent exclusion. So the word choice is a loose one, I would imagine, in some parents' eyes. And then, so basically, the whole conversation we've had today is that we need more places. So we just need to be faster as a council, don't we? If we've been talking about 12 years ago, that was an issue. We've got these 4 classrooms that still aren't even at planning. If what's said tonight is the legislative relief, we have to move faster as a council, and that's just. There's been a lot of talk today and a lot of conversation about mainstream education and supporting, but I'm not hearing many definitive answers.
Can I call time on that one, please, at the moment? What's very apparent here is that although we've had a thorough, meaningful discussion, much more time needs to be devoted to this. And I would like to certainly bring this back to scrutiny at some point in the future and possibly hold scrutiny in a day. And I'd also like to suggest that Diana, Paul, Julie and myself meet up and see how we can progress this a little bit quicker. Okay, I'd like to take the last question now from David Beach, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. If you don't know me already, I'm a councillor for Elland, and I teach currently 0.9 in full-time education at secondary, but I've taught primary for 20 years in Calderdale. So I'm acutely aware of some of the SEND issues currently active in high schools. I want to thank everybody for the presentation so far. It's been really informative. My question really going forward is, Victoria mentioned the word strategy, or strategy was brought up earlier. and I thought somebody asked Victoria kind of when the deadline was for, I'm assuming some kind of strategy report, or is that not correct? Is it the options paper? Basically, what I'm trying to say is, what is going to be, sort of thinking of my involvement as part of the scrutiny panel going forward, is there going to be, because I think any kind of SEND strategy has to be part of an overall educational strategy for Calderdale. So how is it going to work? Is it going to be a document to scrutinise, or is it the options paper that gets put forward to Cabinet? How do we move forward? Because obviously there's a critical need, isn't there, for Ravenscliffe, capacity-wise. I just wondered how it's going to work, that's all.
Yeah, really good point. So I suppose it's two things. The strategy, the SEND and AP strategy needs to be far-reaching, doesn't it? We need to think 5 years ahead what that's going to look like, and we need to do it properly. And we've already started it, but it's got to go out to full stakeholder consultation. We've got to make sure that that's signed off by the whole of Calderdale, so to speak. And within that, all the detail in the action plan about how we're going to turn this around. So that's in progress. That's what we'll be doing. You know, a lot of activity on next. As soon as we're back after Christmas, the options paper's needed now. We need to, you know, so we need a SEND sufficiency strategy within the main strategy. Of course we do. It needs its own focus, and we need to do that and make sure that everyone is largely in agreement with the direction of what we're saying. But at the same time, we need to make some actions now, which is why in the options paper that we'll be briefing members on, we'll be saying, you know, we need to make a decision quickly about certain things, and then we're going to scope out and set out more widely what that looks like as well, to make sure that we're including the voice of all our partners as well across Calderdale. Does that make sense? So
yeah, when you say the options paper is going to go to members, what do you mean? Which members? Who's that?
Well, I think it's a Cabinet's option appraisal.
Cabinet, okay,
yeah, sorry, that's what I meant by that, yeah.
Sorry, got you. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay, Julie, would you like to close this discussion on SEND at all? Have you got anything further to add?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay. Jenny, I know you've hung on and you need to speak about the transport, section 16 transport. Would you like to speak on behalf of that subject?
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry you've had to wait.
No, don't worry. No, it's been a really vital discussion, and I think, if I may just say so, somebody who's not on scrutiny, I think it's been really well handled, and I think you're absolutely right to think about how we might be able to devote some more time to it. No, to be honest with you, it's all right. I've sent apologies to my other meeting, and I've just explained that I will go late to it. But I'm very happy to support. I'm very happy that the report has come forward on transport, post-16 transport, and I'm very happy to stay on and support Andrew Pitts, who's led on the production of the report. I hope very much that people will understand that, in a sense, it wasn't, you know, the introduction of charges for post-16 was not something that we wanted to do necessarily, but it's something that we've actually had to bring forward in the light of the general financial pressures that the local authority is under. But I'm very happy to stay in the background, and Andrew will speak to the report, and then I'll hang on for questions and comments. But thank you very much for accommodating me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Now the next item is Unique Ways and Family Voice parent-carer concerns. However, due to unforeseen circumstances, neither Leah Webster or Shona from Family Voice and Unique Ways are able to attend this evening to present their report on the main concerns of parent carers in Calderdale. They have sent a very comprehensive list of frequently asked questions of parent carers, along with a useful list of commonly used acronyms, which you will find in the reports pack. However, Councillor Danielle Jones has kindly agreed to talk to the Scrutiny Board about lived experience and her journey through the SEND provision in Calderdale. Danielle, would you like to start, please?
Yeah, so as I declared earlier, I am a member of Unique Ways. I came across Unique Ways by being directed from another parent who, usually this happens within most people's journeys. So you would put on Facebook, usually within a group, that things are going wrong and you need some help. And within that time, I was directed to Unique Ways in order for me to complete the Section A part of the EHCP plan and support around a lot of what we've talked about, provision not always meeting needs, the challenges within that. As well as that, Unique Ways offers and has offered me courses, coffee mornings, peer support, which is just invaluable. Following on from that, I'm now a member of Family Voice, which I have found extremely enlightening, in order that we, as a group of parents and carers, with lived experience, can open dialogue within targeted kind of response and challenge that we are seeing patterns emerge, I suppose. At the moment, we're working on the local offer. I think everybody within Calderdale, officers, parents, services all agree it needed a huge overhaul. It had some teething problems, but the service within that we're working with, the person, that we're working with at the moment, has been so receptive. And again, the positive from that is that the SEND in particular have been very much mimicking what our challenges are as parents, which is brilliant because it shows that we're kind of on the same path regarding where we recognise that things need to be improved, what information needs to be provided. And I think that's a huge positive in regards to, it's not us and them, we're kind of responding to this collectively. That does not mean that it doesn't come without parents that are still being where I was, that are facing crisis. Usually it's within accessing services that are limited. I suppose I'm in a position of try to think of the word, an unusual position, because I see both sides now. I didn't at the time. I've experienced with both my children, sadly, exclusions, inappropriate exclusions far too many times that I've been able to challenge with the help of these services. As I said earlier, both my children have an EHCP. That was provided with my eldest with the support of Unique Ways. I think the value of what they offer that I wouldn't be able to put a price on is peer support and advocacy around non-specific support. You can kind of walk in and know that someone's going to listen to you. Sendias is a service that is, commissioned and very much used, but oversubscribed. And sometimes you don't need anybody to solve anything for you. You just need somebody to listen. Within our last conference, we did a frequently asked questions. We had targeted conversations around specific themes, and then any parent who didn't have their question answered by the service. So I think we had CAMS, transitioning to adult services, financial support, education. There were lots of different conversations which were brilliant, and they were all themed around parents raising certain areas of need and challenge. And any parent who didn't get their question answered on the day was able to have it, put it in a box and have it answered later. What that's done is what you've been sent has been given as a frequently asked questions paper, which has been fantastic for future parents, because if you wasn't at the conference, or you might have that question asked in a later time. And actually the services that responded to the questions gave a really comprehensive answer on navigating services, navigating systems, because often it's systems or policies. And that's kind of, I'm in the next stage now, although very much the infancy of adulthood. So both of my children, my youngest has just turned 18. We've gone through the new neurodevelopmental assessment process as well as the old one with my eldest child, which has given me an understanding of the positive changes that that's brought, but also the challenges. And I'm now just about transitioning into adult services. So that's very new to me. And I feel a little bit a duck out of water, but we'll get there. And I know that I have good support around me. So does that cover everything? Sorry. In a roundabout way, that's my story, and very similar to other parents, but they will be at a different stage of their own journey. But of course, we'll probably find similar challenges or that they have.
But from the visit that we had to Unique Ways, your story is very similar to everybody else's, really. And thank you so much for coming on and talking about this today. Okay, let's move on. Item 8. Post-16 transport policy. And I take it that David is going to be leading on this. Possibly not.
Chair, it's Ian Day speaking. I'm assuming that it will be Andrew and Phil Taylor, our transport manager. So okay. Andrew perhaps will introduce the report and Phil may fill in the details after that.
Thank you, Ian.
Is it okay, Chair, if I go ahead?
Off you go. Thank you.
Thank you. As Ian says, Phil Taylor, who's the Transport Services Manager, is on the call as well, and Phil will pick up any detailed questions that members may have. But just by way of introduction, you've had a short report, and as the report says, the Council's Cabinet agreed to require a contribution to the cost of transport for post-16 students who were eligible for home to school transport from September 22. So the scheme has been in operation for a year now. The contribution was set at £315 a year. The rationale for the decision was based upon three things, really: a background of rising student numbers who were eligible, financial pressure on the council's transport budget, which has not particularly gone away, and the fact that while there is a statutory obligation to provide transport for eligible students, it does not have to be free. And on that last point, the report includes at Appendix 1 some detail from a survey that was carried out by Thurrock Council, and basically it showed that 36 of the 62 responding councils did indeed make a charge for post-16 transport, with the highest being £155 a year. The decision was also made in the knowledge that students from low-income families should be able to access a government-funded bursary scheme that is administered by schools and colleges. And indeed, the guidelines for that scheme specifically mentions transport as a legitimate way to use the bursary. The table, paragraph 2.6 in the report, shows the full cost of providing transport this year in 23-24 to the 94 eligible post-16 students. And you'll see that that's over £500,000, £526,000. So even with the contribution that families are making, it's still a very highly subsidised service. Similarly, the table at 2.8 shows, as I referred to, the increase in numbers, and there's been a fourfold increase over the last 5 years in the number of post-16 students eligible for home to school transport. The final thing I just want to stress is that the council will still provide the most appropriate method of transport, regardless of what the cost of that will be. The needs of the student will come first, and the most appropriate method will be charged. So the only change really is the requirement for a contribution, which is equivalent to the cost of a bus pass, which is payable by eligible mainstream students. And as previously mentioned, protection is available for low-income families. I think it's fair to say, and Phil will confirm this, that by and large, we've not seen any resistance to paying this contribution. I think last time I asked, most of the payments for this year had already been received. But what we can't comment on is what any impact has been upon the families. The only indication we have is that, you know, the contribution is being paid, and as I've stressed, it still is only a small part of the overall cost, which is a large cost to the council of post-16 SEND transport.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, Chris, you have a question.
Well, more of a comment, really. I don't know, David Graham, have you received my summary on impact on families on transport? I don't know if you can share that I sent to you. Are you in response to this?
Sorry, Chris, I haven't seen it, but I was on leave until recently.
I sent it at the beginning of last week. Anyway, we have done a survey. The impact on families is quite significant for us. Children with parents of children with special needs generally live in more poverty, have lower incomes than other parents. Often parents can't work. The bursary is a bit of a misnomer. The 16 to 19 bursary only works for families who are in employment and have a reasonable income. There are 8 of our 80 odd post-16 children who are eligible to get the bursary. The reason for that is other families, if you receive any universal credit at all, you gain the bursary, you lose all other benefits. So the vast 90% of our families lose by going for the bursary. So yes, the bursary says you can use it for transport, but it's really, really not worth it. We then have a discretionary bursary that comes into school, but it's £14,000 and it's to pay for everything for helping anybody who's not eligible for the 16 to 19 bursary, but includes things like free school meals, etc. We've done a bit of some audit with families, and basically we have families who are absolutely struggling, who are at food banks, everything else, and we are supporting them. We are paying £200 towards the £350 a year for those families if they're entitled to free school meals. But even so, those families are telling us that it is making the difference. Paying transport is making the difference between that, food, heating, etc. This is a massive, massive pressure on the most vulnerable families, particularly those who, I say, are already living in poverty. So I'm sorry you didn't receive that, because I did write a written response to this. Maybe that could be circulated, but we have got some of that data and it's really not good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody want to come back on that one? No? Okay.
Chair, can I just come in? Sorry, Chris sent it to me when I was on leave last week. I've sent a copy to Diane so that it can be made available to members.
Okay, thank you. Danielle.
Thank you, Chair. My question was actually on bursaries as well. Now, I just wanted to say again, which I did highlight earlier, when we met with the transport team within Family Voice, the drop-in session that we arranged for parents, I thought it was really useful for us to understand the policies, particularly around post-16 transport and how you would apply and the responsibilities. So that was really, really valuable for us all. One of the things I think is really difficult, and I've still not been able to understand it all, and again, I'll declare an interest that I have children who access transport provision, is that often colleges will manage their own criteria for bursaries. And how are we ensuring that children who are educated other than at one setting, so an EOTUS package, or the more unusual settings that potentially don't have that large element of bursary application, how are we ensuring that those children can obtain the bursaries in order that they're not put under any additional financial pressure because of the stipulations that colleges can set themselves, or that they're not necessarily at a setting and their package of education, which would still well, it must be Ofsted registered, otherwise transport wouldn't be provided, which I now understand. How are they able to draw down some additional funding support? Because I'm not 100% sure how that works. And I don't think I got a specific answer when we asked at transport, because it's a bit of an anomaly for children who are educated other than in one setting.
Okay, who would like to come back on that, please?
Hello, it's Victoria again. I suppose the EATAS package, at the drop-in, we had a bit of a chat about this in terms of that being an area of concern. The nature of education otherwise than at school is because children and young people, it's considered, if they've got an EHC plan, that there isn't a suitable school place. So often provision is put together in a way that considers a number of different things, as you've just described. So really, the transport needs to be considered as part of that whole package, really, because that comes under, you know, the local authority is under a duty to look at the cost of the whole provision, and that would be looked at as an individual basis within that.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. Councillor Atkinson.
Thanks, Chair. Mine's just around the expenditure for the transport. Obviously, students need transport to school, but mine would be around the cost. It seems very high. Does that include staff costs, petrol, insurance, and things like that? Does it all come under one bracket?
Yeah, I can answer that one, Councillor Atkinson. Yes, it does. It includes staffing costs, fuel, and the vehicle.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Councillor Lynn. Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, Councillor Lynn. Thank you.
Okay, yes, yes, thank you very much. Well, I think it's really important that we do get to see the results of the survey that that Chris mentioned had been undertaken with affected parents, because I think that is something that we want to consider. And I also think the points that Councillor Durran's made about, you know, a range of different settings and how they would respond to requests for support. I think that is really important. And I think as far as the issue is about the impact on families that are up against it financially, as concerned. I think that is something that we all share. I think probably everybody on this call shares concerns about that. And there's a great deal of work going on with the council and partners and so on to try to maximise the income that people can get, albeit from benefits or whatever, and to support, whether it's with fuel vouchers or all sorts of things, ways in which we can actually help with families that are up against it. And of course that applies to many families, not just families with children with additional needs. So I think I would like to see that anyway, and I think it's part of what we perhaps need to also think about in terms of how the various teams, both within the council and in places like Citizens Advice and so on, to what extent we're taking that into account. And when people are looking at, you know, how on earth they're able to manage the budget and people are really up against it, what can we do to, you know, what further help might be available? Unfortunately, I think in the report, and, you know, I wish it wasn't so, the problem is that the pressures that we were under last year and have intensified this year. There's kind of austerity pressures in terms of central government funding and so on, mean that we, as it says in point 2.2 in the report, we do not get any government funding to provide a free transport service to post-16. And we do have a duty to provide a service, but it doesn't have to be free. And I wish it were not so. And I recognise that it is an additional burden on those families that have been asked to make a contribution. As I say, as I think Andrew mentioned in his presentation report, we've not had a lot of comeback really from parents and families, but you'd be much closer to them, Chris, in terms of your institution than we would be. And I recognise it's not just your institution. There's Calderdale College, there's other colleges, which will other institutions that will also be catering for children, for young people with additional needs. So yes, it would be good to see that. But as I say, at the end of the day, and unfortunately, this is something that, you know, not just this scrutiny panel, but other scrutiny panels are going to have to deal with. You know, there's no sugarcoating of this, really. We are in a situation where because of the sort of failure to upgrade in terms of to upgrade the money that's coming into local authorities in line with additional needs. And we've talked about the additional needs in this particular area, and much less inflation and fuel and all the rest of it, fuel costs and all the rest of it. That's what lies behind this. I wish it weren't so, but we'll certainly have a look at it and any other evidence that we've got, and we're trying to do it as fairly as we can. And I also heard what you said, Chris, about the impact on universal credit claimants, you know, of any attempt to think, and I think that's certainly something that we need to think about as again. So, you know, so I'm very grateful to everybody that you know, to Phil and to Andrew for their work on this area, but also especially for Chris and other people who've contributed to looking at the key points in the report. But thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Yes, I think I've had one or two ward issues where people have come to me about bursaries and how they fill the form in and such forth. But as a general comment, the standard of transport has been excellent. There are only one or two minor issues about name badges on drivers and assistants, but you know, I think in general, the actual quality of the system is very good, very good. Okay, right, I'd like to move on to the last item now, the work programme 2023-2024. Thank you. Ben, are you coming in on this one, please?
Yes, happy to, Chair. First thing I would say is I've noted your comments about possibly arranging a meeting with Paul and Julie to discuss how Scrutiny could take forward pursuing another item on send and bringing it back within 6 months, and I'll set that up. I'll probably look to contact them by email tomorrow morning. The work programme, as members will be aware, is pretty full now. We do have a little bit of capacity, so if there are issues that members would like to pursue putting on the work programme for this year, please drop me a line. And if there are issues that members would like to put on the work programme for next municipal year, where we certainly do have capacity, also we can look at building that into the work programme for next year. I see Councillor Foster's got her hand up.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, it's just a plea really, and I need to declare an interest as a member of SACRE. Bearing in mind the annual SACRE report will take very little time at all to present, maybe 10 minutes tops, for any question to present and have any questions. Would it be possible to move that up the work programme so we can hear it a little bit earlier? Because otherwise, I know Sheila is conscious as chair of SACRE that we will nearly be into the next sort of the next year's worth of data before we've presented this one. So it'd be really helpful if we could just have that moved up the pecking order just a little bit, to maybe the February and the January meeting, because it won't take very long to cover. Thank you.
I think given the nature of the January meeting, it would be difficult to get any significant extra item in there, given that, as we've already heard tonight, we're talking about exclusions, which I think members will have an awful lot to say about. I can discuss offline with the chair and deputy chair whether there's a possibility of bringing it into the February meeting. I'm also mindful that the scrutiny board may wish to get updates on how the two reviews are progressing as well.
Okay. Anybody else got any suggestions, amendments? No? Okay, right. Well, it just leaves me to say thank you for attending this evening. And as this is the last meeting before Christmas, just wanted to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Prashad. Good night, everyone.
Thank you,
Good
Chair.
night.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thank you.
Chair. Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much, Chair, and Merry Christmas to everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.